We're back, episode 23, walking and talking. We're back here in High Rock Park because I'm scouting for some locations to do some mountain biking. And this trail is not necessarily all on the up and up. So we're headed there. I want to check it out to do a little bit of downhill training because it's a good long downhill trail. So while we walk there, we're going to talk about my favorite podcasts. Podcasts have definitely been picking up popularity in the last couple of years. It seems like everybody and their mother is doing one. Eventually, I kind of want to do a podcast, but we've had a couple attempts. Nothing's really stuck yet, but I'll keep you filled in on that one. So, with my list of podcasts, I'm not going to keep them in any order. I'm not going to limit myself to 5. We'll see how many I recommend before I just stop. But let's get into it. So, number 1, and the podcast that I've listened to most recently, is not really even a podcast. It's technically a radio show, but it's called The Session, or Sessions, and it's on KLOS, which is a Los Angeles radio station, and it's with Christopher Hand. If you like music, you need to listen to this podcast. It's basically a show where they dissect famous and maybe some not so famous tracks, particularly in the rock genre, and he pulls them apart track by track. So first you listen to like the drum, or you listen to the bass line, or he walks you through the vocals, and slowly building it up until you get the full song. It makes you appreciate this music so much more. And as a audiophile and a passionate music enthusiast, except I don't play any music, I think this is probably one of the best podcasts or best radio shows out there. And I'd actually start listening to terrestrial radio. I want to say more, but I will start listening to terrestrial radio if more of this kind of content comes to the platform. It's phenomenal. Go check it out. It's on SoundCloud, I think. The easiest place to find it, just search KLOS and Session, and you'll find it. Next, let's go with some history. It's not your traditional history. It is by a pair of comedians, one who reads a story to the other, they comment on it, they laugh about it. It's a new way to look at some of the historical events, particularly in the USA, called The Dollop. Forewarning, this one's definitely on the more adult side of these podcasts. They tend to use language and references that can be explicit, both from a illicit substance standpoint, as well as a sexual standpoint, as well as just some good old curse words. If you are at a place in your life where you're comfortable with some curse words and you're not around your children, if you got any, The Dollop. Go check it out. It's phenomenal. Next, the oldie but goodie. For those that haven't checked it out, you should. If you have checked it out, you already know. I almost call it Sessions. Serial. Serial was kind of the first like radio show style podcast that I knew of. It was a big hit a bunch of years ago. It's kind of fallen off on most people's radars recently, but if you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. It is incredible. So, next is for all those that like your video games. This is a podcast where I trip and stumble over a rock. This is a podcast that covers the video game industry, new games coming out, general random discourse. It's one of my favorite podcasts and one of my favorite websites in the world, Giant Bomb and the Giant Bombcast. While recently I have been more partial to the Giant Beastcast, which is the East Coast version of the Giant Bombcast. These guys are all great. They're veterans in the industry. They've been covering this stuff since some of them were teenagers. Definitely worth listening to. These guys know what's up. A lot of my video game recommendations from off the beaten path, like Celeste or Brother Where Art, I think it's called Brother Where Art Thou. Most of the stuff comes from these guys. Giant Bomb, you guys are the best. Giant Bombcast, definitely recommended podcast. Another one, this one's a little bit more controversial depending on your point of view, but I think this guy's one of the best interviewers in the business. And he puts out shows on the daily, 2+ hours a piece. He's interviewed everybody from Elon Musk, who smoked weed on the show, and now you know where this is going, to MKBHD, who's a famous tech YouTuber, to Christina Hutchins, and I forget the other one's name, but the guys who do Guys We Fucked podcast, which I would recommend, but it is now behind a paywall, so it's a little tougher to recommend. If you can find old episodes on YouTube, highly recommend going and listening to them and seeing if you like it. And then obviously definitely subscribe, because they good people. But going back, we're talking about the Joe Rogan Experience, JRE. That dude is a podcast master. His shows are excellent, especially with people that you might not necessarily be a fan of, or might not understand, or might have opposing views to. I think when you have an opposing view to somebody, the best thing you can do is have a conversation. And that's what Joe does on his show, and I think it is amazing. Even shows where they're interviewing people that I think are kind of human trash fires, like Alex Jones. It's interesting to see their perspective and where they're coming from, because you learn more about it, and you're not just coming in with your own bias. You're kind of getting a more holistic perspective of the world. And while it didn't change any of my views, I still think he's kind of a dirtbag. It is what it is. So next on the list, we're gonna move into automotive. And the obvious podcast choice here for me, as I have been a fan of this dude and his podcast for years, The Smoking Tire. If you want car people talking about car things, and sometimes not car things, and sometimes watch things or bourbon things, go listen to The Smoking Tire. He's part of the reason I got into whiskey, specifically through Taconic Distillery. What's up, Taconic? Yeah, Matt The Smoking Tire is a good dude. Just got married, posted up a post-wedding show, and actually has also interviewed twice Christopher Hand, who I mentioned in that first podcast. But if you're into cars, go check out The Smoking Tire. It's amazing. Totally worth your while. Next, let's get on to the podcast king of kings. Joe Rogan is arguably one of the best podcasters out there, but Kevin Smith may have the widest variety of podcasts that hit the widest demographic. Actually, no, not widest demographic. They basically hit nerds, all nerds. If you're into geeky things, you're gonna love Kevin Smith's podcasts. My two recommendations, three. My three recommendations out of his stable: Fat Man on Batman, which is not so relevant anymore, where he goes through and interviews people around and adjacent to Batman, and some people who are just fans of Batman. His interview of the woman who plays Harley Quinn of the animated series, that interview is next level, because she actually jumps in between different voices that she does. I think she does like Bubbles on Powerpuff Girls, she does Harley Quinn, but hearing her bounce between all of her different voices, it is trippy, and she's also awesome. He interviewed, obviously, the legendary Mark Hamill, who played the Joker on the Batman animated series, if you don't know, and also in the Arkham Asylum games. So Fat Man on Batman. Next, talking Smodcast. The Smodcast is kind of the OG podcast in his lineup. It's where him and Scott Mosier get together and just talk about stuff. If you want to hear Kevin Smith and what goes on in his brain and how it works, go listen to Smodcast. It's super entertaining. He's had a lot of guests on it too, I think. It's been a while since I've listened to an episode, but I still love that show to death. Highly recommend. There's a huge back catalog. He also does live shows too, so if you want to go see him live, totally can. But yeah, go check it out. Smodcast. The last one from the Kevin Smith crew or lineup is gonna be Jay and Silent Bob Get Old. While I'm more of a fan of the early episodes than anything else, That podcast is basically like an intervention slash sobriety meeting for Jason Mewes. And you go through and hear the whole history. Jason Mewes, Kevin Smith, some of the insane stories that make up their history. It is one of the best shows in that lineup. Highly recommend, especially if you're a fan of Kevin Smith and a fan of Jason Mewes and a fan of Jay and Silent Bob. This is like it's like the ultimate behind the scenes lift the curtain podcast for that film series. And with the reboot coming out, perfect time to go check it out. So one more recommendation for a podcast. This one is a little bit different. This one basically goes through, imagine how it works, but for economics, business, and the world. It is the Freakonomics podcast. If you like the books, even if you don't like the books, I would highly recommend this show because it is entertaining, informative. You learn stuff. You learn stuff while you listen. And what could be better than that? So yeah, there's my podcast recommendations. There's a bunch of them. Count them if you want. No particular order. Just pick the ones that suit your particular style, what you're interested in. Maybe check out one you're not interested in. And maybe you'll find something new. Sorry, I'm kind of running up this hill here. With that, that's gonna close it out. I'm gonna go take a quick look at this trail, figure out when it's gonna be time to ride it, and rip it. I'll post a video of me riding this trail when eventually I get my best opportunity. But that is all for episode 120. Holy cow, if I make it to 123, I'm doing amazing. This is all for episode 23. Thank you all for joining me. This has been Walking and Talking. I will see you all tomorrow for Friday's video. Peace. Bye.